All right, you ready to get out of here?
Oh yeah, let's go.
Let's do this. Oh, it's getting louder. It's getting louder the faster I go. That's not good. Hey friends, it's Len here from 1A Auto. In this video, we are going to talk about drive shaft issues. We'll talk about symptoms, what the drive shaft does, and of course, how to diagnose an issue and how to fix it. If you need any parts, check us out at 1aauto.com. We'll ship those parts over to you fast and free. Let's get into it. Some of the symptoms that you might find if you are having an issue with your drive shaft might be a creaking or even a squeaking noise, generally at lower speeds. You might also start to hear a clunking noise, whether you're shifting from park into reverse or even back into drive. Otherwise, you might feel a little bit of a vibration coming through that passenger compartment. That's generally due to the fact that you have an issue with the balance on the drive shaft, possibly a U-joint, or even a carrier bearing issue. So let's get into that. Typically, it's going to come down to a U-joint issue. Inside of the U-joints that are on your drive shaft, there's going to be a whole bunch of little needle bearings. And they're supposed to be lubricated with grease and protected by a rubber boot. If the grease made its way out of there because maybe the boot was torn, moisture and debris will make their way in. That's going to start causing a creaking noise and a squeaking noise. Now, if we're talking about the clunk noise, generally you've already heard the squeaking and the creaking noise. At this point, those little roller bearings that I talked to you about are a little bit worn down and you're starting to get a little bit of movement inside of those caps. So when you shift into either park or reverse, the drive shaft is going to twist a little bit while the wheels are still sitting still, and you're going to hear that clunk noise. Now that we finished talking about symptoms of an issue with the drive shaft, we should also talk about what a drive shaft is and what it does. Your drive shafts are going to be located under your vehicle, and they're responsible for transferring power coming from either your transmission or your transfer case to your differentials, and that's going to be powering you down the road. Now you have to keep in mind, as this is happening, while your vehicle is driving over bumps, the suspension is going to be oscillating, essentially going up and down. So of course the drive shaft itself is going to have to do the same thing. So not only is it going to be rotating, but it also has to be able to pivot at the same time. And this is where the issues can come in. Now on this particular drive shaft, it has multiple types of joints. It has U-joints, and it also has constant velocity joints. And it's also important to note that on some drive shafts, due to the length, they're going to have a carrier bearing. And I've even seen some drive shafts that have multiple carrier bearings. Now obviously the drive shafts on trucks or larger SUVs like this one right here will look a lot different than on compact SUVs or all-wheel drive cars like this one. Something that's important to mention is some vehicles will have front drive shafts as well as rear drive shafts. That will be common on four-wheel drive vehicles as well as some all-wheel drive vehicles. Now let's move along into talking about the diagnosis of your drive shaft noises. Go ahead and locate the drive shaft, which will be located underneath the vehicle. What you want to pay attention to is the overall condition of the drive shaft itself. It's common for them to be made out of a type of metal that will rust over time. Otherwise, it could be made out of aluminum, in which case you're not going to see rust. But if you see any large flakes or damage, like maybe a dent on the drive shaft itself, that's going to cause an issue, such as a vibration of some sort. Aside from that, on either end of the drive shaft, you're going to have U-joints. It's common to have 2 U-joints or even more, sometimes 3 or 4. You want to make sure that you inspect them all the same way. Have a look at each one of those U-joints. We're looking to see if we see rust where the cups are that are attached to the yoke of the drive shaft. If you can see rust coming out of there, that means that the seal's no good, moisture made its way in, and it's on all the little needle bearings that are located inside of that U-joint cap. At that point, you're going to start hearing a little bit of squeaking noise, possibly a creaking noise, and eventually you're going to start hearing a clunk. Now once you've inspected that, you also want to make sure that you take hold of the drive shaft and try to wiggle it around. We're going to go up and down, side to side, and even try to give it a little twist. While we're doing this, we're looking for movement. If you can see a little bit of movement, generally that's not so bad. Some U-joints are greasable, and if that's the case, go ahead and apply a little bit of grease and check them again. Typically, by applying grease to these U-joints, it's going to take up the gap. If your U-joints aren't greasable, which is also common, that's something that you're going to want to make sure that you pay attention to and check it every once in a while. If the movement seems like it gets worse and worse over time, it's going to be time to replace those U-joints. If you did happen to find movement in your U-joints, it's important to note that some U-joints are replaceable and others are not. If you happen to see that you have a locking clip on the U-joint cap holding it to the drive shaft, that typically means that it is replaceable. If you do not see a locking clip, then generally it means that it is not replaceable, in exception of a situation like this. On this particular vehicle, you can see that you have these little plastic tabs that protrude out along each of the ears. Now those little plastic tabs are actually a filler that goes inside of this, and it holds the U-joint to the drive shaft itself. To remove this type of U-joint, you would want to apply some heat. Be extremely careful because as you do, this will liquefy inside and start dripping out. Once all of that has come out of there, you can replace this type of U-joint. Otherwise, if it has the clip, you would want to squeeze that clip and then pull it out of the way. At that point, once you've removed all of the clips, you can press the U-joint out of the drive shaft. Also, to thoroughly check your U-joints, it's a good idea to drop the drive shaft down so you can maneuver them around. Now let's make our way underneath this compact SUV. On this particular model, it's all-wheel drive, and it has a drive shaft that makes its way all the way from the front of the vehicle to the rear differential. On this particular vehicle, it has a constant velocity joint at the rear of the drive shaft and all the way at the front. Now we're going to want to make sure that we inspect these. The way that you inspect one of these joints would be to first take a look at the boot itself. It's made of rubber. That's supposed to hold the grease inside there. If it looks like it's dry rotted and cracked in any way, or even worse, it has a little bit of grease coming out of there, it could potentially have some internal damage as well. So with that said, you might find that you have the symptoms that we had seen in the beginning of this video. So once you take a look at the boot itself and you make sure that it's not actually dry rotted and cracked, you also want to grab onto the shaft and try to lift it up and down and side to side. We're trying to feel if there's any movement in here. Movement inside of one of these constant velocity joints is highly unlikely unless of course there is some serious damage going on in there. So if you found that you had some movement or even the boot was torn, go ahead and head to 1aauto.com and order yourself a new one. Now that we've talked about the constant velocity joint, let's also talk about the possibility that you have a carrier bearing on your rear drive shaft. If your rear drive shaft is long and extends from the front of the vehicle all the way towards the rear, it's going to need to have some sort of support, generally near the center. Now to check the carrier bearing, you're going to want to check it pretty much the same way that you would check a U-joint. Go ahead and take hold of that drive shaft and lift it up and down. We're going to go side to side, and what we're paying attention to is the rubber area inside here. We're inspecting for any cracks or damage. You also want to see if it looks like the drive shaft itself is sitting in the center of the carrier bearing, or if it looks like it's sagging down or to one side or the other. If it looks like it's sagging or it's just dislodged in some way, that means you have to replace the carrier bearing. Commonly for that, you will have to disassemble the drive shaft. Now on this drive shaft on this vehicle, you'll find that it also has U-joints. But this U-joint looks a little bit different. The cups themselves are smaller in diameter. You'll also find when you're looking at those cups that they don't have the replaceable clips on them. That tells me that this U-joint right here is non-replaceable. If you found that you had an issue with this type of U-joint that doesn't have the clip and it's smaller in diameter, you have to replace the entire drive shaft assembly. We sell them at 1aauto.com and we'll ship it out to you fast and free. Looking at the drive shaft along here, you can tell that you have this welded on plate. This is the weight for balancing the drive shaft. As you can tell right here, there's a large weight welded in place, but it's actually starting to peel away a little bit. That can cause a vibration of some sort, especially if it happened to fall off. Now I've got this one right here, and a little bit further back, I have another weight. If either of these were to be damaged, peeling off like they are here, or even fall off, you're going to find that you have a vibration driving down the road. Now let's talk about common reasons why you'd want to replace the entire drive shaft. Maybe while you were driving, something came up and it bonked the drive shaft and potentially dented it or damaged it. Other than that, if you have a steel drive shaft, maybe it's a little rusted or it seems as though the balancing is off. Maybe you had tried to replace those U-joints and you found that while you were trying to use the tool, you ended up damaging the drive shaft. Typically that's going to be at the yoke where the U-joint goes into it. And then of course you also have the possibility that while you were going through the diagnosis process, you found that you have multiple issues and you really just don't want to deal with replacing all those different parts, just go ahead and order yourself a whole brand new shaft. And of course, you also have those drive shafts that I told you about that have the non-serviceable or non-replaceable U-joints, in which case, you just go ahead and replace the entire drive shaft. Okay friends, so that's what I've got for you for some of the top things that you want to pay attention to if you found that you're having drive shaft issues. Whether it was a creaking and a squeaking, a clunking, or even a vibration coming through the passenger compartment, it could all come down to your drive shaft. So of course you want to just go ahead and pay close attention to that and make sure that those U-joints and the drive shaft are in good condition. If you find that the drive shaft is damaged or the U-joints aren't replaceable, you're going to have to replace the entire drive shaft. We sell them at oneauto.com. If you can just replace those U-joints, you can go ahead and do that as well. Now I hope you liked the video, I hope you found it interesting. If there was something in this video that you think somebody else might like, go ahead and share it with them. It would mean everything to me. If you like the video or love the video, smash on that like button for me. It would mean the world. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe, ring the bell. That way there you and all of your friends can be kept up with all of our latest content. Thanks. I think the GoPro might have just fallen off.
Yeah.
Aside from that, on either end of the drive shaft,
Start from there.
I bonked your GoPro. Have a close look at each one of the U-joints and see if you see rust coming out from around the cups where the little U-joint cups are.